Yeah. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 32 of the Faith and Whatever podcast. I am your host, moderator extraordinaire, Josh_Carmen on Twitter. I'm joined, as always, by the lovely Jamothy Yule. He's at James, Y-U-I-L-E. You can find Chris at Marion Ranch. And believe it or not, I'm joined by a special guest tonight who's actually not Garrett. If you didn't know, they don't look the same. Garrett's a little bit shorter. So we have a really special guest with us tonight. His name is KJ, and actually, I'm just going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself for a second. Tell him and plug all of your stuff. That's one of the reasons we want to for sure have you on here, is to plug away so our vast audience can totally fall in love with the KJ from OC podcast. So who are you, and what are you doing here?
I came to take
And where's
over.
Garrett?
Manifest Destiny, how do you like it? Doesn't feel so good, does it? Oh, he's militant. Yeah, so I'm KJ from OC. I have a podcast on SoundCloud. Also, it's on YouTube. Just Google or search whatever, KJ from OC. I'm also on Twitter, KJ from OC on there. Facebook, KJ from OC podcast. And if you want to email me, kjfromocpodcast@gmail.com. And I've been doing podcasts for, 36, 37, 38 episodes or something like that. And I started off talking about sports and then relationships and kind of doing more social awareness things now. So I'm probably going to mix all things in together so that way there's something for everyone every week.
So it's just reality interpreted through the lens of KJ from OC.
Yes, sir.
Is what we're looking at.
Yes, sir.
Well, this is great. We're super excited to have you on today. One of the things that we're going to be talking about expansively is we've just been, so if you are a follower or a friend of the podcast, you know for sure that we are all huge sports heads here, and by that I mean me,
esports,
and yeah, and so the Colin Kaepernick buzz has been going off like crazy for a long time about his stance or lack thereof during the anthem. Do you see that? That was a good segue.
I saw that. I like
And
that.
and so it was an interesting conversation. And KJ, we've known each other for not too long, probably
like 5
or 6 months. Yeah. And so he and I started talking just about the value of what that has raised in terms of social awareness about the problems of police interactions in the black community specifically. And we asked him if he would be willing to come on and kind of share with us and I think teach us a little bit. And we say that mainly not because we're not able to learn, we're not able to look this stuff up for ourselves, but I think there is value in having somebody from the black community who, works as a therapist, who is a professional, but also is a believer.
Yes.
And is able to kind of give that duality perspective for what the stance of somebody who has struggled with this or who's kind of born into this identity and this minority oppression that is so heavily felt in the black community, who is not a believer, and then somebody who is a believer. And we're really excited to kind of just get some of your perspective on this whole thing and really what we can be doing, not just as white people, but as people in general. And I think that's an important distinction to make at the beginning of the show, because this isn't just hey, you're black, come teach us white people how to be less awful. Because I think Christ transcends that for all people, and regardless of skin color. But we are really excited, I think, more for the nuance of the perspective and things like that. So we have a billion questions. And I think we'll just start shooting.
We narrowed it down to 1 million.
Yeah.
Well, I got about 30 minutes, so
yeah. So if you guys, Chris or James, if you guys think of any questions, feel free to jump in. But I figured this would be a good place to start. Or you want to say something?
No,
Okay.
No.
I figured the Colin Kaepernick thing would be a healthy place to start in the sense that it's sports. It's easy to kind of use as a jumping off point. But so the biggest criticisms with Cap's lack of a stance towards the flag. He is paid millions and millions of dollars. He's biracial. Shouldn't be so uppity for a rich guy. A little tongue-in-cheek with that term.
Right.
And his legacy is not that great, right? He's kind of a punk of a player. Mm-hmm. Like, he's not the best vehicle to be delivering that message. He's no Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
Or something like that. And so therefore his message is discounted. So somebody in your perspective, what are some of the responses that you have when you hear those kinds of discussions, and what do you kind of say to that?
It kind of reminds me of Jason Whitlock, which I heard him interview Sean King a few months back. I think it was back in January February.
They hate each other.
They sure do.
They hate.
Did you hear that interview on Fox Sports?
Yeah.
It was insane. It was very unprofessional, in my opinion. on Jason Whitlock. But yeah, where he basically tried to discredit Sean King releasing the Peyton Manning story and the sex assault or whatever it was from when Peyton Manning was in college at Tennessee. And so he basically changed it from what the story was to let's talk about the individual who released the story and try to discredit them. And I think the same thing is happening here with Kaepernick, is people don't really want to talk about why he's taking a knee, why he's sitting, or why he chose to sit initially. And they'd rather talk about discrediting him and say, oh, well, he was raised by white parents, so he can't have any oppression. He didn't specifically talk about himself. He didn't say, I'm oppressed. He said, a country that oppresses black people or people of color, however he said that. And so when people take that stance and say, well, he was raised by white people, and so he can't have this perspective and he makes all this money. Well, he can have that perspective. He didn't say it was me that it happened to. He's saying it happens to people. And so it once again, it tries to reestablish what the narrative is, rather than talk about, why he's taking the stance he's taking and the information that's out there that I can get just like anyone else can as to what the backup is for his opinions. People would rather just talk about what he did. That's easier. It's easier to talk about him taking a knee than it is to talk about police brutality, which can affect all of us, regardless of what color you are. But we just see that it happens more frequently to black people.
So this is what we would call a straw man argument,
Okay.
right? Is that in the right realm of logical fallacy?
In the sense that he's the straw man.
Yeah. So they're
what
attacking
exactly
him
does that
and not
mean?
his message. Is
That's
that right?
an ad hominem.
Ad hominem. Okay, so that's the right thing. So one of the responses and the retorts that a person like Jason Whitlock has, who's also black, by the way, and
We think.
yeah. Well, I'll leave that to other people to kind of comment on. But the idea of Whitlock says, hey, look, this is just what's known as like a black gesture, right? And he says this is just something that a lot of his criticisms for this come out of it just being something that's not an actual difference maker. And he's saying the thing that we should say to white people is just say, fine, make a gesture, take a kneel with him, and then let's pat ourselves on the back and feel good, and then just go on to any type of change. So what is the comment to that, right? That it's just a black gesture and doesn't really mean anything.
For Kaepernick taking a knee?
Yeah. From Whitlock specifically.
I think it's part of what leads to a discussion. I don't think it sounds like he's saying it's irrelevant, and like we're just going to move on after this and not do anything. And I think that's also not true, because Kaepernick is now given $1 million to, helping kids get backpacks and stuff like that. And the Niners backed up that and gave another $1 million themselves. So he's putting his money where his mouth is, which is exactly what people were saying he should be doing. But the funny thing is, it had to start from somewhere, right? So even if he were just to give $1 million and no one ever would have known, right? Because there was no controversy. America loves controversy. That's how media gets spread, through controversy and things like that. That's why we had the Hillary Weekend at Bernie's kind of thing, because it's controversial, something to talk about. And so now that he's putting his money where his mouth is, you don't really hear the people who are detractors saying, oh, he shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. You don't hear them saying anything. You don't hear them giving him credit for what he did, because, well, now it's over and done with, and it doesn't feed their narrative.
Sure. James, Chris, anything you guys want to add? Nope.
I don't know enough about the story overall.
Pretty solid. Okay.
I know some. I don't know the criticisms you were talking about. I know the initial story.
Yeah. So Ray Rice had an interesting take on this. Not Ray Rice. Ray Lewis. Yeah, Ray Rice.
That's what I wrote.
That's why. Okay, that's why I read that. Okay, so Ray Rice is the guy who beat his wife in the elevator and knocked her out. He slugged her hard.
Yeah.
And so Ray Lewis, who's a believer, actually has an interesting take on this. Ray Lewis spends basically all of his free time now, right, and kind of back in the urban neighborhoods, back in the ghetto, and really doing stuff to help establish jobs and kind of economic booms in inner city neighborhoods. And you see this kind of thing from a lot of like rich black people who've made it in terms of being entrepreneurial and turning and helping back. Like Will.i.am, right, has started a car shop, actually a car factory in his own neighborhood in California, in his own ghetto. And so this is not, or I guess where he claims is where he's from. So this isn't like an uncommon thing by any stretch of the imagination. But his criticism of Cap was saying, hey, look, I get what you're going for. I get what you're trying to do. I'm angry as well. But let's actually go there. Let's actually go into the place, into the inner city and help out and, blah, blah, blah. Is that a fair critique, or is that kind of comment something that you think is valuable or helpful, or is it just kind of more divisive in its origin?
I think like with Dr. King and with Malcolm X, even though they kind of had different perspectives to start, they they can't be existent without one or the other. You know what I mean? So I think you can kind of put the two hands together and be like, even though I kind of have this perspective, our overall end goal is about the same. So we can still do that. So Ray Lewis and other people, putting jobs into those kind of neighborhoods and stuff like that, that's good. And there's nothing wrong with Kaepernick taking a knee initially, but he's doing the same kind of thing where he's like, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and do these kind of things. But also, it shouldn't be on the individual athletes to create jobs, because we had such things such as redlining, which was where, I think it was from 1930 something to 1960 something, the government backed $120 billion worth in home loans in America. But when it came to giving those home loans to black people or neighborhoods that were around black people, they wouldn't give those home loans. So that was called redlining. And so you have black people who now couldn't afford to get homes because the government's not going to help them get a loan. Where a lot of people, obviously, with $120 billion, needed home loans in order to get homes. And so those homes that black people could have had in order to pass on to the future generations,
sure. To help end generational
it couldn't happen. And so even though I love that athletes, entertainers, whomever, black businessmen and women are doing these kind of things, it shouldn't be them that have to do this. It should be anyone who wants to just put a business there, but...
So your thought, is it correct in saying your thought is that they shouldn't be the only or even the main form, but just kind of addendums that help out with whatever the government should be doing and stepping in and helping
Because
out.
I never hear about people who leave certain cities, and I'm just going to speak to Orange County, Irvine, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, and going back and helping their community because it's already helped out. It's fun, right? Yeah. You never hear about that.
I don't have to come back to Irvine to...
Yeah. So, it's
Irvine's helping you.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's the same kind of thing. It shouldn't be on an individual to create jobs there. The jobs should already be there because people should not be prejudiced to not put a job there or a company there because they're afraid that black people are going to ruin it with all their excessive crime. But, crime and poverty, I think we talked about this before the show, they kind of go hand in hand as far as this country is concerned. When there aren't jobs, people are going to find ways to make money illegally.
Well, you have to survive. So you have anything you want to add before we move on to the next?
Because you guys are in the sports, I don't know.
So we'll move on to the next topic. And Black Lives Matter is a huge movement that has continued to gain steam. And as an individual, as speaking not for all white people, why not? For all white people, you can't call me a racist if I'm white. Where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So, anyway.
Somewhere bad, probably.
Getting fired.
The Black Lives Matter movement, right, has something that has picked up a lot of steam. And I would argue that it is my belief that institutionalized racism is still a thing. The idea of, like, the way your public school gets a lot of money, right? Public funding is based on the value of the homes in the neighborhood.
And if we can't buy homes.
Right. And if neighborhoods continue to turn to crap.
This is why the Yankees keep winning the World Series.
Exactly. It's the pinstripes.
It's the same concept.
And so, right. And so that is a thing, right? And I think that is a governmental issue, and I think that those things still very much exist. But with the civil rights movement that happened all through the 50s and 60s, there to really take a major step in legislating the end of, kind of oppression for minority communities, even though it didn't really. But starting that conversation, right? There were clear leaders in this, two of whom you referenced, Malcolm X and then Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
And Black Lives Matter has seemed to be this generation's kind of, attempt at getting more social change to happen, right? Some form of continuation of a civil rights discussion and moving on in relation and as it pertains to police brutality with minorities there. But one of the difficulties that I have seen with that is that there isn't a group of leaders that kind of have risen to the top to say, hey, look, here's what we're looking for. Here's the way to end it. Here's how we do these types of things. I think only in the last 2 or 3 months have I seen the demands or the way that you can help as far as Black Lives Matter is concerned.
It's a groupthink-led movement.
Yeah, and so as that has come, what do you think, as somebody who is looking into this, right, as a person who's not black or who doesn't experience that same type of oppression, so it's not on the forefront of our mind there, how do we continue to get behind a movement and help grow it when we have to, right, because there have been dividing stances in BLM, even amongst itself, amongst the leaders and amongst the group. And the problem with the groupthink idea is that anybody can say, oh, I speak for BLM, almost like anonymous, right? And how they hack people there. So how do we kind of cut through the noise? What are some tips that we can do as people to look for stuff that's not, divisive, but actually helpful if there's no central figure or figures to look to?
I would say there are some figures, and as you were talking about it, kind of made me think of some of the hip hop artists or rappers that I've listened to for years that have spoken about these kind of topics, whether it was, NWA with F the Police from 1988 or whatever. So I know Ice Cube is obviously still making music and making movies and things like that. But I think that's someone who, if he gives an interview and that topic comes up in conversation, that's someone you can look to in terms of, what are his perspectives, and maybe he has a suggestion as to what we can do or whatever. Killer Mike, he's an Atlanta-based rapper.
Yeah.
He's from a rap group called Run the Jewels, also with a producer and rapper named LP, who's from New York. But he's another guy that's someone you can lean to. Sean King, another member and a leader of the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's other artists and hip-hoppers like Pharoah Monch, Chino XL, and Immortal Technique that have tons of stances on this. As a matter of fact, even a white Muslim dude named Brother Ali from Minnesota, he's another guy that, when I hear these issues and I think back to all the music I've heard personally over the 38 years of living and all the rappers and artists who've touched on these topics, and it's like, well, here are your leaders right here. They may not be, the suit wearing, walking down the street with 50 people behind them kind of thing, but if they can still reach 20, 30, 150,000 people with their message in their music, and we know music is going to last forever.
Sure,
people still listen to Elvis and the Beatles, etc., and Jimi Hendrix. These people are dead, but people still listen. So, and Tupac, rest in peace. But so, if they still can get that many people behind them listening to their music, and they still have their messages within their music as it pertains to Black Lives Matter and Black advancement, then I think those might be just some of the leaders right there.
Okay, that's great. So essentially, then. The method has changed, but the leadership can still look the same. It just has taken a different form. So music might be a fantastic place to start. And so we may not be able to expect to be able to look for the same thing that we saw in the 60s because society has changed, stuff has evolved and things.
And there's also Shannon Sharp, who works on Fox Sports. Matter of fact, he just had a conversation the other day with Ray Lewis and Skip Bayless. And Ray had a position of, I think you kind of mentioned it already, Ray had his position on what black people should be doing, and Colin Kaepernick don't take a knee with the flag. But Shannon was like, okay, let's not even sit here and talk about what he did. Let's talk about why he's doing it and get to some answers and talk about the struggle instead of just disrespecting Kaepernick, because it's like it's not even about him. It's about what the main issue is. And so Shannon Sharp's another one. He used to play tight end for the Broncos and Ravens. And there was someone else. Dude. Oh, and there was something else I wanted to mention too, because I've said this for years. And when it comes to the black community, we don't really have, leaders on the forefront like we used to. And the two people I mentioned, the thing that they have in common right now is that they're both dead. And so there might be, and I don't blame people for being afraid, there might be some fear of, if I step to the forefront and seek change for black people or people of color against oppression, against the big machine in America, what's going to happen?
And see, that's probably one of my favorite reasons of having you. I never would have thought about that, from that perspective. There's no, it would be like, dude, I would totally say, hey, if we want change, let's change it there. It's like, actually, somebody might actually take your life. I mean, that's like a legitimate thing to consider. It's like, oh, crap, that kind of...
Well, something that came to my mind, and I'm not sure what to do with this observation. I just find the observation itself to be interesting. You were mentioning, these are people that are potentially, we could call leaders of Black Lives Matter, or of just or Black voices
Delegates
that are
even,
right. And most of the people you named were musicians and some sports people, right? And something that occurred to me while you're listening to these names was the names of yesteryear: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. These were religious names. These are people who are representing religion and what religion would have for Black lives, right? What would Christianity want for Black lives? What would God want? What would Islam want, right, for Black lives? And it's occurring to me that that was a good thing then, in the sense that that there was let's use Christianity for the example here. There was Christian leaders who were stepping forward and doing that role of being representatives, and lending a community voice with a singular voice.
Right.
Where are those people now? I mean, it's like Al Sharpton, like who's like why is
Don King?
Why is the Christian community, as a whole, why aren't we offering that anymore? Why aren't those people coming forward and being that voice anymore? Like, why is that no longer an imperative of the Christian community?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And that leads to the heart of what I would like to ask there. As somebody who is, a black man, but also a believer in Christ there, what is the one thing or, a few things that you would like to see the non-black church doing specifically in terms of help, right? We have big names. Ronald Sider is a huge name, or people who are in urban areas and are kind of known for.
There's more mega church pastors than ever before.
Yeah, and so what is it something that you would like to see, or what is something that the non-black church could do to help out in the greater capital C church setting? How do we step in and kind of be voices of change or agents of growth for that from your own perspective?
That's a great question, actually. I'm sure they tie together. I've never really thought about that one specifically. I guess as I think about it, I wouldn't put it on the church to, once again, fix the problem as much as it is on the government for the established laws and policies that they have in place. And, it's up to the government to fix it, but I think it would be nice if, some of these mega church pastors would recognize that these are issues in the country and acknowledge them maybe even within their own congregation.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if they will, because it may not be very popular. In Orange County, you have Pastor Rick Warren with Saddleback Church, and I know Orange County is a very Republican, very right-wing conservative place.
Oddly, in that sense, nobody outside of Orange County would guess that, but it's totally true. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting thing though, like these mega churches will do partnering, right, in urban communities where they'll partner with churches that are already there and send funds and send sources and that is the thing, right?
That's awesome.
Like white partnership with black community churches or whatever that is. I say white because Rick Warren's church is predominantly white, but that idea. But do you think there's a more effective way? Because to me, that still kind of feels a little hands-off-ish, right? And it's just like, they're taking care of that over there. Let's just send money there. Is there, how do we be smarter about that? How do we be smarter about?
Well, I think there's actually a law in place. I know Trump is trying to repeal that law about pastors and members of clergy or whatever religion aren't allowed to talk about, I think, politics, or was it the
support of a candidate of specific politics from the pulpit.
Yeah, they can't talk about candidates or how to vote on a bill, but they can speak politically.
Yeah,
they could. But I think it becomes how's this going to work? If my congregation isn't predominantly black, I'm not going to be speaking to anyone that's really going to listen. Maybe that's the thinking. I don't know. It would suck because it's like, but a lot of our congregation isn't gay, but we have a lot of talks about gay people or about HIV. So it's like, well, so what? Like, just talk about the issue because it's an issue. And would God want this issue to continue the way it has been? No.
That's great. Chris, you got any thoughts so far?
Nope.
And so, what are some changes that you personally would think would help benefit BLM in terms of being able to broadcast a wider message?
Unbiased media coverage, where they actually want to know, what is it you're fighting against? How can we help? But I think mostly it's just about listening to our experiences. You've seen my Facebook posts, and I love how you jump in and, well, actually, you had that one response a few weeks ago that I pointed out on the show. But you may have seen all the other people's posts and stuff that just didn't want to hear it. They just want, let's just get the answers. Let's just get the answers. But when you just say, let's just get the answers, you negate what my experience is that I'm talking about. And if conversation is part of it in order to build that empathy, right, because I'm coming from a therapist perspective, then just let me talk and just listen without trying to tell me to be quiet so we can just move on and fix all the problems. Like, why are you such a hurry to fix it? Like, let's just talk about it first. Then we can talk about it as a group of people and human beings and then start to come up with some ideas together, But really it's little people against big government, right? That's really what it is. And if we're just going to be so, disorganized down here with just little people with all of our ideas, big government's like, well, we're just going to still exist and you can't stop us.
And that's the interesting thing, that all of the people that you were talking about that are voices or leaders are relegated to the things in which the black community excels, right? Sports in particular and music in particular, right? That kind of cultural aspect.
Entertainers.
There. And if you're not into that, right, or if you don't value it, you're not going to naturally go look for it, right? But particularly in things that transcend, kind of cultural barrier or cultural specifics there, like religion or like politics there, that's a harder voice to get the message across. So there needs to be a greater onus on people who are outside of the Black community to kind of dig into that literature or dig into that music if there's some understanding to be cultivated. But to your point last week, James, about the Wesleyan quadrilateral, right, and how experience is a huge part of that in terms of how you interpret the Bible and how you read Scripture. That's important for us as believers to hear, because if you're an individual who kind of submits to the lordship of Jesus Christ, you never want your experience to be invalidated, right? You always, first of all, everybody loves to talk about themselves. Everybody, is a fan of that to a degree there. And so it's so important, because that's part of the Christian experience, is somebody else's experience, and kind of how that difference can be from mine or from yours or from anybody else's. So do you think in any capacity that government will continue to take steps, or from what you've seen, right? You've been alive for almost 40 years. There are things trending more positive or less positive in your minds? In
my honest opinion, when we look at the whole context of U.S. history, right? We had slavery for hundreds of years, and then we had the Reconstruction period and Jim Crow laws, which furthered segregation. Then we had the Civil Rights Movement, which was a little more than 40 years ago, because it happened before I was born. It's trending. I mean, you see, I was talking to my uncle and my father yesterday, and we said, they both said, I didn't have it as bad as my mother or as my grandmother. And I look at it and like, I didn't have it as bad as they did.
Yeah.
or as my grandmother or my great-grandmother, right? So is it trending upwards? Absolutely. You don't erase 300 plus years of slavery and segregation, and
you do if you guys would just stop talking about it.
But yeah, it's gonna take some time. Matter of fact, I was thinking about this the other day. It'll probably take some generations.
Okay.
Because the progressive movement, as much as they're inclusive of everyone, whether it's sex or perceived sex or what have you, I think the same thing you'll start to see true will also be with people, and just how, I don't care if you're Black or Latino or Asian, whatever your nationality is, or European descent, doesn't matter. Let's just all be people and love and live together how America should have been. It should have been written in the Constitution, but it was not. So it's just going to take some time, and we have to be patient, but we also still have to be vigilant and not just give up. And did I say that word right? Vigilant.
You have to be a villain.
LeBron James #. So it's just going to take time, but we have to keep moving forward and keep pressing forward.
All right. So for our lovely friends who are watching and or listening to us right now, give us 3 quick takeaway points in terms of effective help that we can be as people in this discussion with our brothers and sisters in the Black community.
Okay. 3 quick points. Funny, I didn't even think you were going to ask that, but you did, and now I have to think of 3 quick things. One.
Well, the first one you already said, right? Make sure to listen to experiences and not negate them.
Absolutely. And listen unbiasedly. I know it's hard to remove a bias when you're listening to someone, but instead, just don't be thinking about, well, here's my response. No, just listen, Number 2, simple things. If you have friends that love to tell racist jokes or talk bad about a certain person of color or whomever, whatever it is, shut that down. Just say, hey, you know what? I'm not really trying to hear that. And maybe even start to distance yourself from them, because what really perpetuates racism is not talking about it and acting like it doesn't exist. And then number 3, check how you vote. Check who you're voting for, what policies you're voting for, what props you're voting for, what candidate you're voting for. Because if they're also perpetuating racism or prejudice, etc., then you want to check that, because at some point it's probably going to trickle down to you. Because a lot of people don't look at these issues and say, oh, well, it doesn't affect me, so I care. It's usually, it doesn't affect me, so I don't care, right? And so when it does start to affect you, then it's like, oh, well, now I care, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't think anyone cared about terrorism when it was happening in other countries until it hit here. So those are my 3 take-home points.
Man, awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and a share. Feel free to subscribe to our podcast, and make sure you stop over by KJ from OC's channel. He's got some great stuff on there. Follow him on SoundCloud. You can find him there. Are you on iTunes yet?
I am not. I need a website. If you want to build me a website for free, let me know.
And then you can connect with us. We are at faithandwhatever.com. You can find all of our social media there, facebook.com/faithandwhatever. So, yeah, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.